Hi everyone, Alex Tardy, meteorologist with Weather Echo. Time for an update. It's been a couple weeks. When we last spoke, we talked about a potential weather pattern change for February, and it looks like that is going to materialize. A return to wet and much cooler weather for the far west, so that means a lot of snow. Let's take a look at the February update. It's hard to believe after this January that we could be talking about major snowfall in the west. Okay, this is the water year since October 1. What really stands out is the Great Basin and Rockies, much above normal temperatures and much cooler in the Northeast. Now, most of the country has been dry despite recent big storms in the South, Texas, all the way to the Southeast. But the water year remains wet in Southern California, extending up into the northern plains there. And that's because of those big precipitation events, one in mid November, one late December, early January. So despite dry January, Southern California remains wetter than normal and really wet in parts of South Central California. Now, looking at the same area, zoomed up here in the west, you can really see that dry area across the Great Basin, especially the Rockies. And the warm area, wow, that really stands out. Near record warmth. That's affecting our snowpack with a lot of early melt. Okay, over the past 30 days, contributing to that melt, just dry conditions across the west. Most dry in Southern California compared to normal. It just shut off. Now the warmth continues, and that's why we've seen a lot of snow melt, and we're already behind in snowpack. So adding the snow melt just makes snow conditions even worse. Take a look at the snow conditions. Brown across the Wasatch, the Rockies, even now the northern Rockies, and now even the Sierra Nevada getting significantly below normal. The snowpack in the east from the lake effect snow and from those two mid-Atlantic storms, yeah, really unusual, and that's why it's dark green to see snow that far south and that widespread. Okay, here's the pattern change that we're going to see. Now we talk a lot about an upper ridge, and on the left-hand side here is the past 30 days. Upper ridge has been in place, but it's not unusual to have an upper ridge. Whenever you have storms, you have upper ridges. So the storms have been north of Hawaii, repeated storms and atmospheric rivers going up into British Columbia and then weakening. And the storms have been in the east with persistent cold air anchored over the Great Lakes northeast. And so you see the storm track, it's been really far south over the past 30 days. So on the left-hand side, this is what we have seen. Now, what's changing today? Well, the upper ridge is still around, but we have a storm going underneath it, and we have the storm in the northeast shifting east. So everything's shifting east and south. So you can see on the right-hand side, we have potential Gulf of Alaska low that will shift down along the west coast. So ridges, troughs, highs, and lows, those are normal. So you don't have to get rid of the ridge. You have to shift and change the weather pattern for your area to be in the storm track, that black line. Okay, now what about atmospheric rivers? I mentioned a lot of them in the Pacific over the past 30 days. They've all been going across Hawaii and then in British Columbia. That's the case for Super Bowl weekend, going up into Oregon as shown here, and then really weakening and falling apart. Don't worry, that doesn't mean we won't get precipitation. Now, on the lower part of the panel, we see a major atmospheric river, again, north of Hawaii, but look what happens. Instead of holding together in British Columbia, it also weakens as it moves towards British Columbia in mid-February. So atmospheric rivers are going to be weakening over time the next week or so, but they're still out there. Now, what's really important is the weather pattern change. The upper level trough and the storm track settling across the west coast. Now, notice the ridge. It doesn't go away. It just shifts into the Pacific. And then it also flattens out. So we get a milder flow across the rest of the United States as the Hudson Bay low retreats as shown here. Now, what's important is how persistent and slow moving this weather pattern is on the west coast. This means a lot of precipitation for California and much of the west. And because it's a cold weather pattern, it means some big snow. Now, when we get into next week, that's really where it cranks up. Another shot of colder air comes down from the Gulf of Alaska, even colder than the first one, and it remains anchored. That's key along the west coast. So a very slow weather pattern, not a big atmospheric river weather pattern. Notice the upper level ridge. It didn't go anywhere because that's part of the atmosphere. troughs and ridges, but it does shift over the central Pacific, so that shuts off the storm track for Hawaii and the central and northern Pacific. But it puts the storm track right over California, as shown here. So this evolution is potentially significant for the West and for snowpack improvement. Now, this is the latest weather guidance in terms of precipitation, and this is really beneficial. Quite large numbers, considering it's not a significant atmospheric river, but it's a slow-moving, cold system, so it's really going to favor the mountains. Really beneficial weather pattern and flow, southwest flow persistently coming in, cold air, so you have instability, dynamics because you have the low pressure system aloft right over us on the west coast and slow moving. So these are big numbers. These are several inches of precipitation through February 20th, potentially, with the Sierra Nevada really standing out, but even Southern California mountains showing up, and parts of the Great Basin mountains. Now, we showed this last month, and we talked about potential wet February that a couple weather models were showing. A couple weather models, the Canadian and this NCAR model. This potentially could pan out with this next series of storms over the next 2 weeks, or at least through around February 22nd. Now, what are those models showing now? Well, the climate forecast system is hitting on this really wet pattern, especially week 2 in the lower left as shown here. And it's also showing much warmer conditions setting up in Canada and especially the Northeast as we go through about February 19th. So wetter and cooler along the west coast as shown here. Now, if you go further out, late February, early March, does that pattern stay the same? Well, not quite. We show a very wet pattern for the Pacific Northwest and that continued warm pattern for southern Canada and much of the eastern United States. So a big break, a big change in the weather pattern with warmer conditions finally, and breaking that streak of Arctic outbreaks in the east. Okay, I also took a look at some latest information for February. Now, it does show the storm track on average coming across Oregon and the northern Great Basin and potentially clipping northern California. And you still see that active atmospheric river pattern down by Hawaii far south. So this is what's expected for February, but notice this, for March now, I took a look at some newer information for March, and it's still showing the potential for persistent upper level trough carving across northern California and the Great Basin and then shooting across the northern part of the United States. This is more the weather pattern we were actually talking about 2 or 3 months ago, where the cold air would be over western central Canada. But what really ended up happening for the first part of the winter, it was over eastern Canada and the Northeast. So we do have good opportunity to potentially make up for snowpack in February and then potentially even in March, as shown here, over critical areas of Northern California and the Rockies and Great Basin. Hope you enjoyed this weather insight, and I hope you enjoy the weather pattern change to cooler conditions after this really warm weather pattern for most of January, early February. And most importantly, the major improvement potential for the snowpack in the West, California, parts of the Great Basin, and even parts of the Northern Rockies, where we really need it as we get into the second half of winter and we look at the water supply potential as we go towards the warm season. Remember, February is on average the wettest month, especially in California. So we still have potential with this slow-moving cold weather pattern to make up for significant snowfall in February and perhaps even in parts of March, as we showed. You can sign up for the weather blog. You can also follow us with these storms on X and Threads, or you can watch us on TikTok as well. Check out our webpage, weatherecho.com. Thanks, everyone.